Hello, everyone, and welcome to another Streaming Wednesday. I'm Will Schick, Director of Product Development. I keep wanting to say Head of Product Director Development. It's a whole thing. It's a Wednesday. It's fantastic. We're halfway through the week, and we are going to be doing some really awesome painting on a LAAT LE today. So if you joined us for Mini Stravaganza last week, you got to hear the lowdown on both the AA5 and the LAAT LE, which are the two new vehicles coming to Legion in the next couple of months. I don't know the exact date right now, but I know one of my compadres in the chat will be able to tell you all right away what the current expected arrival date for these two awesome vehicles is. So today we're going to go through, and I decided that let's just keep the good times rolling. I painted the AA5 over the weekend of Mini Stravaganza, so I wanted to dive in and do the LAAT LE. Today I'm going to be doing something a little different. Normally I would be painting this for my clone force, probably in the 104th Battalion colors. As you all know, I love the Wolf Pack. However, I'm feeling a little sinister today. I woke up on the wrong side of the bed, I guess, so I wanted to do something really evil. And I apologize to all of the Galactic Empire players out there that I just called you evil. That was very rude of me, and I respect your need for authority. However, I really wanted to do something like sinister, dark. When I think of the LAAT LE, I think a lot about, the chase scenes with Ahsoka Tano, because they're the police force, they're chasing her. You get a lot of really menacing vibes from this vehicle, which I really like. So I wanted to dive in and play with that a little bit. So I'm using a lot of blacks, a little bit of really Sith red, and we're just gonna have fun and kind of paint up something that's a little bit like a LAAT LE out of Nightmare. So I'm gonna get this camera off of me. We're gonna go over here and do that. So this is where we're starting. I undercoated the miniature with a dark gray. However, I don't think this is dark enough for me. So I'm going to start the whole process by basically stippling on a bunch of really dark black. And for this, I'm going to be using this color right here. Not that one. This color right here. I'm going to be using Decay Black from Scale. So I like this color. It's not quite a flat black. It's got a little bit of life to it, a little blue. So we're going to just play with that, and we're going to have some fun. We're just going to stipple the crap out of this thing, then we're going to dry brush it. I have my colors all kind of picked out, so to give you an idea of the progression, we're going to start with that that Decay Black, excuse me. I'm going to move on to Negro Gray. We're then going to use a Abyssal Blue. And then kind of our highest high is going to be this Ryla Gray, which is actually kind of a bluish gray black. So those are the colors we're going to be using. I'm going to be pulling out my fancy dancy makeup brushes, which are ideal for this kind of work because they have the shorter bristles, they stipple really well, they dry brush really well, and they're super cheap. So as you kind of destroy them, you don't really feel bad about it because they're easy to replace. And you can get them kind of anywhere. There, of course, are fancier dry brushes. If you really want to start getting amazing results with your dry brushing, a finer brush might help you do that, all of that stuff. So to give you an idea of what I'm doing, I'm effectively just going to my palette. For this technique, if you didn't see the Mini Stravaganza stream, you can also check that out where I kind of explain it. I'm getting a nice amount of brush color on the brush. And then you can use a texture palette, or you can just use a good old-fashioned paper towel, and you're just going to work most of that color off the brush. For this, I'm not going to worry about getting too much off because this is going to be kind of like my undercoat, so I want it to be pretty thick. But as I move forward, I'm going to be working harder and harder to get colors off of the brush as well. So with that, we're just going to start going in, and we're just going to start coloring this bad boy up. And I want that off the camera so we don't lose it. So again, this part of the process is really straightforward and simple. We're kind of just laying down that initial foundation of black color, and I'm going to need lots more than I put on my palette. One of the things I really like about painting Legion and just the game in general is that it gives us this opportunity to do bigger miniatures like vehicles, and that's something that can be really fun and rewarding. It's a very different kind of approach where you get to just start stabbing the miniature really aggressively with the stippling techniques and all of that. Of course, it changes the camera setup. I'll probably wind up going off camera a couple of times here, so I'm not used to handling something so large on camera. So again, this is not really a stipple. This is just kind of me painting directly with the makeup brush. and getting those colors down. I'm not super concerned about consistency. Again, I'm just looking to kind of like deepen up the darkness because there's the quote from the stream right there. Deepen up the darkness. Brr. Oh, it's such a sad Wednesday. It's raining outside. It's all gray and gross. We're deepening up the darkness with our decay black. But again, because the airbrush primer that I used, or the primer that I used in general, it doesn't really matter if that was an airbrush primer, is a dark gray. Normally that's dark enough for the kind of like really bright poppy colors I like to do. But because we're really playing with black, and as we've talked about before, black is heavily defined by its highlights, which is what also makes it an amazing candidate for like dry brushing and stippling. We want to make sure that our deepest color, our darkest color, is already laid down on the mini before we start dry brushing, because it's going to be really hard to go back and adjust that later. So I'm just going to take my time here, and I'm going to lay down that initial extra coat of dark color, so that once we get into the business of building up those highlights in that stippling technique, I know that we're going to not have to use a wash or anything like that to really start messing with shading back down, because it's difficult, not impossible, but it's very difficult once you start doing the dry brushing and the stippling to shade everything and not lose kind of the texture results that you had going on. And I think this is another thing that makes stippling so awesome for vehicles especially, but a lot of other things, is that you get this really nice chunky texture from it, similar to what you can achieve with an airbrush as well. So if you don't have an airbrush, which a lot of folks don't, I certainly didn't for a long time, and you're kind of like, how do I approach painting a big vehicle or a big miniature, and I want to get that same kind of like gradation and textures, stippling and dry brushing is an amazing way to do that. So with that going on, it is important to note that you've noticed my LAAT LE is completely closed. I painted over the canopy. You can't see inside. I want a really sinister red canopy glow because I don't want you to see anybody. You know, this is like a menacing little evil LAAT. However, John Schaefer on Friday is going to be painting a LAAT LE, and he's going to be going over kind of the full hobby approach if you want to do the interiors, if you want to paint the crew, if you want to maintain the clear cockpit, all that stuff. So he's going to be taking kind of what I would call a higher level display approach, whereas what I'm doing here is just getting this bad boy ready for the table. To a point where I think it's going to look really cool, it's going to look great in game, but it's not necessarily something that I'm looking to maximize the results of, like putting crew or troops in the back with the door open, getting all the interiors done properly. Like this is meant for the table, and I want it to look good on the shelf as well. Of course, I want all of my minis to look cool alongside their compadres and their compatriots, but for me in a vehicle, that means typically not doing the interiors. That's just a little bit more time than I want to devote often to just my force in general, and that's a personal preference thing, and it's something that is really excited. I'm excited to watch John and how he approaches that in order to maintain all that stuff. Of course, the studio miniature, which we showed off during Ministravaganza, it has fully painted interiors and fully painted crew and all that good stuff. So you'll be able to see, I'm sure, coming up in some of the later marketing images and everything, some really cool interior shots. Brendan Roy, who painted it, did an incredible job, like getting all the computer consoles and stuff with this purple magenta glow, because the studio one is painted for the Grand Army of the Republic, the clones, so it has all these colors. Okay, so I've laid down my black base. You can see it. We've really darkened it up now. We have a nice deep black to work from. I'm not going to clean this brush. This is really important when you use this technique, is that you don't ever want to put your dry brush or your stippling brush in water. It's better to just work off most of the color. So this is similar to like if you have any familiarity with oil paints, you don't want to put your oil paint brush typically in the thinner. You just want to like wipe the excess paint off on like a towel or something. So you can do that. You can also leave the paint on to some extent. That's really going to help you with your blends. So you're going to naturally kind of mix the paint in the brush, and that can be really useful too. So again, you want to just think about like playing with this stuff in a manner that allows you to kind of do some free mixing, but keeping that brush pretty much coated in paint the whole time is going to make sure that the technique really works. If the paint gets runny or thin, you're going to have a really bad time, because dry brushing obviously kind of implies a drier paint. Having it be runny and stuff is not going to be good. So now for this stipple, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to work off a fair amount of the paint off the brush, because I want to start building up my layers and stuff over that really deep black. So even though I have my colors going on, I'm kind of ready to go. And from here, the fun really begins. This is where the fun begins. You just start stippling on and stabbing that color on. And we're going to build up layer after layer really slowly through this like repeated process of stippling. And what that's going to do is, not only is it going to let us make really, really smooth blends if we take our time with it and work at it like we would with an airbrush, it is also going to build up texture. And the texture part of stippling is what I really like. This is something that you can achieve with the airbrush as well. And it's kind of part of that gradation that you get, that effect when you do really good airbrushing. The texture adds to that whole like mechanical feel. This is why it works really, really well for vehicles and other kind of like non-organic things. Of course, you can also stipple flesh. I've watched some really crazy tutorial videos on how to use the same technique for doing like big monsters. You know, if you ever wound up with some kind of large creature, it could work for a dewback, for instance, which is kind of on the smaller end of what I would consider a big creature, but in Legion, definitely one of those ones that you could use the stippling technique on to really get the scales in and those kind of colors going on. And this is a process that like ultimately is gonna, it might take a while, especially because we're working with really dark colors. And again, black is heavily defined by its highlights. So we're not gonna see a ton of difference, and that's ideally what you want. If you start rushing it and you push it to where you're like taking too much bright color too soon, you're gonna start to lose the nice blend that you're gonna get from this stippling. And it's just something to keep in mind as you like work the colors. Also, if you have trouble, like you can leave these wings off if you wanted to. Mine was already assembled this way, so I'm just kind of like working around it. They're pretty sturdy anyway. I could always shift to a smaller brush as well. I do have a smaller makeup brush that I'll use for like more tighter areas and stuff, but for right now it's just all about giving it this good stipple. And the bigger brush is going to make the stipple go faster because we're obviously working on a larger area. So this is one of those things where it's like you don't have to be really precise or pretty with it. You can just kind of like go crazy. So what I'm going to do next is I'm going to grab my Decay Black and I'm going to mix in a little bit of my Abyssal Blue, which is my follow-up color. And I'm just going to kind of start mixing these two together to start building up highlights. And again, my goal is really to keep this to a pretty deep black, but I do need that bit of contrast so that everything looks really nice. So I'm just going to put some on my palette. I'm going to grab a little bit of my Abyssal Blue, and I can pull this over to show you what's going on here. So you can see I have the Abyssal Blue down here. I have the Negro Gray up here, and I'm just kind of like mixing them together through the brush, getting the brush nice and coated. And then I'm going back to my little paper towel, and I'm working off a lot of that color. Again, a texture palette would work. Paper towels, you might get a little bit of smoots on your brush, so you might get a little bit of like fibers, little paper fibers and stuff. If that happens, just pick them off. It's not a huge deal. That is why some people really enjoy the texture palette. I like these textured paper towels. You get the same result, so I can really see like how much paint I have on my brush, how's the dry brushing working, all that. And again, we're just going to go back through and we're just going to start doing another stippling pass. And this is going to be like over and over and over again until we reach the results that we want. But this is just kind of like the process that you go through to paint something this large and in a fairly quick manner. I think by the time our hour is up, we'll hopefully have a really nice looking hole. And then next week we can come back in and we can work on like the little, I don't even know what these panels are. Solar panels? They're not solar panels. They probably have a name that I can't think of right now. But we'll paint the little wing panels. We'll do some really cool red designs. Like I want to get a nice like angry red stripe on this guy. We'll do the cockpit. We'll paint up some of the laser cannons, that kind of stuff, the blaster cannons. And we'll hopefully in about 2 hours have a really nice looking finished piece. And for something this size, which, you know, this is a big boy, like scale to clone, you know, it's a very large vehicle. Is not a bad amount of time, honestly, to spend on this kind of stuff. So I do have a saber tank, I think, but it's not near me. We'll see if at the end I can grab it, if people want to see it next to like a saber tank. You can see now, hopefully, kind of how the colors are starting to build up. That other light, maybe that'll help as well. Kind of start showing that differentiation. And of course, for the camera and stuff, I might just push the contrast even further than what I would normally do for this guy. Well, once we have a few stippling layers and we've built up that color, then we'll go on to a true dry brush. And in that true dry brush, we'll really start cranking up the extreme highlights. So that'll be places where the panels really stick up and stuff like that. This is a great way to get all your aggression out too. Just get to like stab it in there. If you're feeling a little stabby, you know, grab a stippling brush, grab a vehicle, start stippling away. This is how to roll right here. I'm also not worrying too much about the undersides. A, because no one's really going to see those very much, and B, because they'd naturally be in shadow anyway, so I don't have to particularly be super worried about working the bottom of the vehicle too much. Now, if you were going to do something crazy and having it like banking or climbing in altitude or something like that, where you would see more of the bottom, that's certainly something you'd want to think about. But from my standpoint, you know, it's not something that I'm particularly concerned with, because we're going to have it at a very natural kind of the standard studio elevation, which means that you're really just going to see it from kind of this angle in general. So working at the top, working on the tops and stuff is where we want to spend most of our time. Yeah, and this technique works great on pretty much any vehicle. Especially, like I said, anything mechanical, you can really start to get that kind of like texturing in. And the more stages you have in between where you're kind of mixing your colors, the smoother those blends are going to get. And I've watched some folks, let me get that out of the way. I've watched some folks online and some different painters like use this technique to create some really crazy things. Like they've done infrared, kind of like IR heat vision blends just by using stippling and stuff. So it is a very versatile technique, and you can get a lot of really nice looking results with it fairly quickly and easily. It's just all about your color choices, and then again, how long you want to take in terms of building up your layers and stuff. And if you get a little too heavy, you can always go back in and kind of like wipe the color off like I just did with your finger. You can be comfortable you are with what's going on, but you will, like working this fast and on something this big, you know, you're going to make a couple mistakes here and there, but mistakes are part of the game, and fixing them is just part of the nature of the hobby, and thankfully it's not super difficult to adjust when you kind of run into issues and stuff like that. So we've gone from that really flat back. You can kind of start to see how we're getting all this nice texturing going on, even though it's still really dark, which is what we're kind of looking for here. So now we're just going to really start getting in there. And I'm switching my grip so that I'm holding the Mini a lot tighter, because now I'm really just doing the hard stabs here. You can kind of see how everything is like really shuffling. But this is where the rubber hits the road, as they say. Yeah, and there are a bunch of other techniques that you can use as well. So a couple of folks in the chat are talking about salt weathering. I love salt weathering. I think at some point I definitely want to do a little video on it for folks who might not be familiar with it. But salt weathering is really cool because, you know, a lot of the times when we go in and we weather stuff, and we're trying to chip it up and rough it up, we're faking the effect of like chipped paint. With salt weathering, you actually paint an undercoat like a primer layer, like you would with an automobile. You then attach salt, like big old salt chunks, like kosher salt chunks, to the vehicle in spots using water to stick. And then what you do is you spray your top coat over that, and the salt kind of sticks there, and then you paint the whole Mini with the salt on there. And then at the end, once you're done with your top, with like your normal paint layer, you go in and you tear the salt off, because it'll just rub off if you give it enough pressure, because it's just stuck on with water. And that'll tear the paint and reveal your primer layer. So exactly like it just makes a real paint chip that you control. And it's super cool. It can be a little tricky to learn because you have to learn how to like paint around the salt without knocking it off too early. But because the acrylic layer dries, you actually get the three-dimensional paint tear because you've torn paint layers. So you don't have to fake it with like smart highlights or shadows or things like that. It's pretty cool. I know our creative director Dallas Kemp has another technique that uses hairspray, which he really likes. And effectively it's a similar idea to where you spray the Mini with hairspray after you have your primer layer on. You paint the Mini, and then you can go back through and basically you can wipe off the top paint layer because the hairspray doesn't allow it to adhere properly. So you can effectively paint chip it that way, and then once you're done with how much chipping you want to do, you simply go through, seal the miniature with like a dull coat or a matte spray, and then the paint sticks on for the rest of the time. So there's a lot of like really cool kind of vehicle painting, weathering techniques that you can use that are pretty fun and interesting, and a lot of different ways to approach it. Okay, so I've pretty much moved on to straight Abyssal Blue. You can see now that we're really starting to bring up these highlights, and our black is less black now. We're getting all that stuff in. Because I want this to remain fairly dark, I'm probably going to move into a little bit of my Rylith Gray. And I'm going to mix this in with my Abyssal Blue. I'm going to start with a very minimal amount though, because this is really going to tone the color. So I'll again show you kind of the palette. So here is our Rylith Gray. Here's our Abyssal Blue. We're just kind of like mush these together. I'm going to take a little bit of the Abyssal Blue and I'm going to mix it in. You can see how quickly that really changes the overall value of our Abyssal Blue. I think we're okay to kind of go a little heavier. Not looking for a perfect blend here. Start rubbing that off on my paper towel. The name of the game is subtlety when it comes to this technique. So even if you think, oh, I didn't really change it that much, it doesn't take a whole lot before that effect starts to really like come through and start showing. So we're just going to start coming in, and you're going to start seeing now that we've added that extra layer of highlight. Now we're really starting to pop it up. So I have to be careful now if I want to maintain that super deep, dark, like angry approach without doing a wash. This is probably going to be the last stippling layer that I'm going to do, just based on how evil we want this to be, how midnight black we're looking for it. And next we're going to move on to dry brushes. So once we get into that dry brush stage, that's going to be a really fine, just trying to pick out the highest levels of details and stuff like that. Not as particularly concerned about down there. And it's just a lot of the similar processes to get a really nice end result. And I haven't, and an important note, right, I've never gone back to the water with my brush, and I won't until I'm done. So this brush has just purely been in paint the whole time, allowing that paint to mix through the brush and on the brush, because I'm using minimal amounts. And then if I need to get rid of paint on it, only using the paper towel. or the texture palette or whatever you're using to wipe the excess paint off the brush. That's how I'm cleaning the brush. There are things you can do, like you can grab a bit of foam if you want, so like some blister foam or some packing foam or whatever. You can dampen that down and then make a damping pad. And what that'll do is it'll allow you to help clean the brush if you're like switching between colors drastically. It'll give you just the right amount of wetness where you can like kind of get some of the paint off as you go on the paper towel. It also allows you to like refresh the paint that's on this brush, and that can be important when you're mixing in new colors because it'll allow those colors to mix on the brush as well, which will create better blends. So it gives you a little bit more control, and it means you have to go back to your well less, which is also pretty useful. So all of these like are really cool, fun tips that you can play with as you kind of explore the style and determine what exactly works best for you and your approach to stuff and all of that. There's certainly no right or wrong answer outside of don't get your stippling dry brush wet until you're ready to be done for the day, because once it's wet, this technique will not really work that well going forward. So it's an important bit to always keep in mind. What I'm doing now is I'm just mixing in more of that Rylith gray, trying to create a nice little highlight color that I like. That'll feel really good. And again, I'm just kind of going ham. I'm going to need a new paper towel here pretty soon to get that color off. There we go. So just come back through. Start stippling a little bit. And then we'll go back through and we'll probably just do an ever brighter highlight of Rylith gray. Just kind of build up our final looking highlights. All right, so I'm pretty happy with that. We have a lot of nice texture. We do have a lot of gradation from the blacks, as you can see, but we're still maintaining that really nice looking black. So really what we need now is we need that like that super poppy highlight that it really starts to run. Do you have to worry about wearing fingerprints? Because the paint is so dry, it dries really fast on the Mini. So you're pretty safe to touch it like right away. Now if your paint is wetter, it's not going to work as well for this technique. And therefore you're going to want to be more careful. I'm mostly holding it by here, but when I start to really get in there, I know I haven't done this side for a while, so I'll touch it. You could put on a glove if you needed, if you felt better about that. I don't particularly worry about it. Again, we're going to go back through and rough this up anyway, so if I stuck my fingers in it and I got a fingerprint, then I would just kind of like make that an area of battle damage or like a little bit of chipping or whatever. But yeah, the paint is so dry, it dries so quickly on the Mini, you don't really have to worry about sticking your finger in it. Having a handle though or something is always best practice. But you will find yourself needing to brace when you want to really get in there and like start stabbing, because it does take a pretty firm stab to get the stipple like to really take and to create that nice gradation. So it's not a soft lover's touch. It's more of like I woke up on the wrong side of the bed this morning and I need to take my frustrations out on some like frozen meat Rocky style. Okay, so we're good there. Again, I'm just going to now grab pure Rylith. And I'm going to start doing some dry brushing here. So I'm not really going to mix this with anything. So you can see how that is much, much more blue compared to our black. I have to be careful with this, so I want to make sure that I get most of it off my brush because it will obviously really taint my colors if I go too far with this because it is so bright. And then if I decide we want to go up one more level, yeah, that's how my wife comes home and she's like, "So how was your day?" I was like, "Well, so I started stabbing this miniature." I mean, definitely not anyone I work with. I would never stab anyone I work with. I love them all too much. They're wonderful people, and they don't deserve to be stabbed. So now we're going to a true dry brush. So instead of stippling, which is the stabby motion, we're just kind of doing a really light brush across, just trying to pick up those raised areas. And hopefully you can see like how right here, where we have these nice hard edges, the more I dry brush it, the more color it's going to pick up. And this is one of those things where you want to build that color up super slow over the course of several passes. It should not happen quickly. It's like a magic trick, you know, a few swipes across, you don't see anything. The more you swipe, the heavier and the more opaque that buildup is going to become, and it's only going to happen on the raised areas. So again, these like panels here that are raised above the flat of the mini like hole, those are going to catch a lot of that paint. This area is not, because it's really flat down. So this is going to give you that extra level of highlighting that's going to really pick out all of those areas. And then what we'll do is we'll go back through towards the end after we have everything kind of complete, and we'll do some panel lining with some really, really dark black, and that will help our distinguish our panels and our separation lines even better. So it is really just a matter of playing with the contrast and then defining those different volumes of panels and getting everything to stand out nice and neat. So now we're being a little more kind and gentle. We're not stabbing quite as much or at all. This is like the Bob Ross version of 2 hairs and some air. If you were going to go and smooth out some nice clouds, this is the moment right here. It's working those clouds. You can also think as you start going into your dry brush, you know, where your light source is coming from. So if you wanted to really accentuate the tops, what you would do with your dry brush is you'd only come in with your dry brush from that area. And that's kind of what you want to do with the highest of your highlights, is think about, okay, if my light source is coming from the top because the sun's at noon, like many miniature paint jobs are, I'm just going to come in and I'm only going to highlight like this. And what that'll do is if you dry brush in that one direction consistently, it's going to build all of your highlights in one spot, and then it's going to feel like you have a consistent light source. So this is another really cool trick with dry brushing where you can get that zenithal light effect really, really easily, as long as you think about, okay, this is my light source, this is how I have to dry brush everything as we move through. I'm not particularly looking to replicate that effect on this guy as much. So I'm just taking more of that every place gets its highlight approach. But you certainly can really affect that. So again, like if my light source is at the top, then I'm just going to make sure that I always come down from the top. If my light source is from the bottom, I'm always going to come up from the bottom. So my stroke is always going to be bottom to top, light source from the top, top to bottom. So that's another really cool trick that you can think about if you want to like push your dry brushing even further and make that stuff really start to stand out. Okay, so you can see now how we have this really nice texture going on. We have some really nice blends. We're not just at pure black. You know, it feels very vehicular. I'm going to grab, what color do I want for this? I'm going to do one more kind of upper highlight, and this one's going to be really, really soft. So I'm just going to grab some Arctic Blue. I want to mix that in with my Rylith Gray, and that Arctic Blue is really going to punch it up, so I want to be careful with it. So here's my Rylith Gray. You can see the Arctic Blue is like just a blue-white, so you can see how different those two colors are. And we're just going to start kind of like mixing those colors together. It looks pretty good. So this is going to be really, really stark, so I'm going to have to be very, very careful with it. But that's okay. It's kind of what we wanted out of this color anyway. Go back, get rid of it all from the brush. Seems pretty good. And this is going to kind of be our light source highlight, so we're just going to focus mostly on the places that would catch the highest level of light. Of course, this is going to be the top here. Oh, you get out of the frame, otherwise it'll start trying to tell me you're the thing that it wants to pay attention to. For those asking about airbrushing, you're in luck. Our creative director, Dallas Kemp, is actually going to be doing some airbrushing tomorrow on stream. So if you want to kind of get in on that and see, I believe Dallas is going to be doing a big old piece of terrain. So he's going to be showing kind of how he approaches doing larger miniature stuffs, especially terrain with the airbrush. He's going to have it all set up. We've been testing the setups and stuff, so if you ever had any kind of curiosity about how to start airbrushing or what airbrushing can bring to your hobby, or you have an airbrush, you just haven't used it yet, you're not really sure where to go with it, that's going to be a really great, it's really going to be a really great stream tomorrow where we can all walk away with a little bit of extra knowledge. And that'll be the first of probably several that we do. I definitely want to break out the airbrush on a vehicle in the future, kind of show you how I approach doing vehicles with the airbrush. I'm by no means a master. I think Dallas himself would also say he's by no means a master. We're definitely inspired amateurs working to better our skills when it comes to the airbrush. It's not a technique that I go to a lot, but I've been trying to grow in that realm and improve my skills, and I've learned a lot along the way through making mistakes and talking with others and trial by error. So anything that I can pass on, similar to how Dallas will probably approach it tomorrow. Most of the stuff that we learn is based on the things we did wrong at one point or another. And then every once in a while, you learn something. You don't have to make the mistake. Someone else who made the mistake first tells you about it, and you can learn from there. So, but it should be a good stream tomorrow. And we'll be doing more of that as well. Okay, so there we go. So that is the black all laid down for our LAAT. I'm really happy with how this turned out. It's got all the right looks. It's still very dark and sinister, but it's got that nice texture. It has nice highlighting. So we have a really kind of mechanical looking black that's going on. From here, I think where we can go next is we can start talking about maybe blocking out some reds, and then we can go in and figure out how we want to do that. So in thinking about kind of where I want these reds to be, I'm just going to grab what color do I want here? I think this hash or purple will work pretty well as a flat base, like a nice dark base. So I'll start knocking that through. And just play that. Okay. So I haven't thought a ton about where I want these markings to be, but I think the easiest way to kind of approach it is going to be to think about it in terms of panels. So the first place that I'm kind of thinking I really like will be to just kind of like block in right here. So I'm just going to use the brush for this initially, just because it's going to give me a lot more control. And then from there, what I can do is I can take the smaller stippling brush, I can kind of stipple it on. I can stipple on our highlights, and that'll maintain a similar look as long as I'm nice and controlled for it. For our vehicle to maintain kind of its integrity and its look and stuff. Just grab a little bit of water. Thinned it out too much. So now we're just going to go through and we'll just start picking stuff out. And if we see an area that we think will look cool, some angry red, we'll put that in. But if I use those panel lines to guide me, at least a little bit, it saves me from having to worry about doing freehand, which I kind of don't want to do at this point. And so, kind of make it work. I think if you wanted to put a Yoda in a LAAT, that would be pretty sweet. I think John, like I mentioned before, is going to be showing how to add passengers to the opening to the. These are the doors, obviously, for the LAAT. And I think one of the things he's going to be talking about doing is like how do you add passengers to the back so that you have like people being transported and it looks cool, and again approaching it a lot more from that display mentality of this is the miniature that you use in the game, but if you wanted to really turn this into kind of a self-enclosed diorama of sorts, where it tells more of a story than just it on a battlefield or it chasing people through the streets of Coruscant, that's going to be kind of the John's Friday stream. So I'm really looking forward to that. I love it when people get inspired and really take their miniature to that next level in terms of its storytelling, because to me, the hobby is all about that storytelling. The games that we play are all storytelling. We talked a little bit about this, the narrative importance of games and why games are important in our dev panel at Mini Stravaganza, which was probably one of the highlights for me. I had so much fun moderating and contributing to that panel, and even though these are developers that I get to work with day in and day out, we don't often get a chance in the current environment where we're not all in the building together to have more of those spontaneous kind of philosophical debates about what we do and why we do it and all that stuff. So it was really cool to be able to not only have that time, but also to do it in a way that was live, that everyone in the community can watch. And I find you begin to really understand people a lot better when you know where they're coming from. And that panel was definitely one of those ones where it was like, okay, let's see where we're all coming from and go from there. But yeah, you could absolutely, taking Yoda with the cane and have him just kind of be there and like all meditative-y. I don't think that's a word. Meditation-y? Meditative-able? I don't know. You know what I'm saying. That could be really fun and cool. And it would look great. And I think maybe it was John that mentioned Gavin, our PLM, who you also had a chance to meet if you watched the X-Wing and Armada stream from Mini Stravaganza or the after party. He kind of realized very early on when he was building his LAAT that you can take Inferno Squad, I think, and you can like set them in there and they make this really cool diorama with I think Del's the sniper, right? So you've got like Del Miko with the sniper rifle, and it looks like he's aiming out of the canopy and stuff, so it's really cool. It looked really awesome. I was like, oh, that's amazing. I sadly do not have Inferno Squad yet, so I wasn't able to do it, but I feel like with the way this is coming out, this feels like a very Inferno Squad LAAT to me, with the really dark colors. These really cool sanguine reds, and I don't think, originally I was thinking Sith red, like really bright reds, but now I'm kind of all in on this sanguine color that we've got going on here. It's really deep wine color, so we might just play with this, highlight it up, keep that really dark, foreboding kind of look to it. We just need to punch up those highlights and stuff. So continue to do this. Everyone in the Empire loves a deep wine, it's true. So we're just going to keep playing with these panels and kind of like highlighting. Now, of course, if you wanted to do something a little more stylistic, you could absolutely give it some stripe markings or things like that if you were going to do that. one of my suggestions would be to grab some masking tape. So once you were done with your, and approach it basically in the same way you would do it with an airbrush or anything like that. But grab some modeling masking tape that folks use for other hobby stuff like airplane miniature models and stuff like that. And then you could mask off your area and then just go back through with your flat colors and your brush and build that out. The masking is going to help you keep very straight lines and stuff like that, whereas I'm using the panel lines to make sure that my lines are being straight. You could just do like a big old stripe down the side like Brendan did. He did a lot of squad markings based off the Clone Wars LAAT colors and show. And a great way to kind of approach that and make it quicker and easier and consistent is to use a little bit of masking. You just want to make sure, in my experience, you always want to make sure that you seal the mini before you put the masking tape on, because even masking tape that's like, it's the weakest adhesive ever, it won't pull paint off, it inevitably does. So that extra bit of sealant is just going to ensure that that masking tape is far less likely to destroy the paint job underneath it. You know, I mean, I think, when it comes to play, Gavin having the Inferno Squad inside the LAAT is super cool. It tells the story, and who cares if, it never picks up Inferno Squad again. They're just hanging out back there. Like, if it's all about making things look cool, right? It's not necessarily about exactly what's happening on the table. Miniatures in general are simply stand-ins. They're identifiers for the actual action being unfolded. It always makes me laugh when people are like, well, that guy clearly is just standing there, so of course he's going to get shot. I'm like, the miniature is standing there because unfortunately we haven't yet mastered technology to make the miniature move. If we could have the miniature just like move around, we would. Zero question. Like, that's just too cool not to do. But the miniature is just a representation. It's an abstraction of the action that's happening on the tabletop. And that even goes so far as to like the turns, It's not like that unit of clone troopers is waiting for their turn to move. That unit of clone troopers, like, all of that action is happening simultaneously in the real story, But in order to turn it into something that can be played and enjoyed, there's an abstraction element going on to the action that's happening on the table. Getting too like focused in on the rules, as it were, as being the actual representation of the simulation, right? Miniatures games are not simulationist to that level, because they can't be. The nature of the genre just stops them from being able to do that. So it's really important to remember that, that guy who's just standing there holding the gun, that's not what he's doing all the time. That just happens to be how the miniature is represented. What he's actually doing is running around, taking cover, shooting, yelling, rolling, whatever. Whatever the story at the time would say that makes the most sense they're doing, that's what they're doing. I always that's part of the fun of the imagination of the whole thing, is thinking about, okay, what does that battle look like? How is that saber tank moving and turning, and how's the duel between it and the AA-5 that we have happen in my house all the time? So we have one boy who plays Galactic Republic with his saber tank, and one boy who plays CIS with his AAT. Like, how are those things moving around and engaging with each other? Like, what's the story? What's the movie being played out? And I don't know about you, but like, I can't have my tank move or shoot at something without making the noises that it would make. Like, that's just a requirement. It must make those noises. So I want to tell that story. I want to see that story. It's an act of play. You know, all games are acts of play. The cool thing with miniatures is that you have all of the visual representation on the tabletop. It's just like playing with toys when you were a kid or an adult. I never stopped. That's why I love my job so much. I get paid to play with toys. It's amazing. But yeah, that act of play, using the imagination, knowing that there's more to the story than what you can physically represent. So, yeah, we're going to do this one. I don't know if this was more red than I was thinking or just the right amount of red. But I'm like, ooh. I'm like really feeling this red right now. It's got that evilness that I wanted. That sinister nature. This thing's going to be scary. We're going to get that red canopy on it next week. We're going to highlight up these reds. This is not going to be the LAAT that you want coming after you down the alleys of Coruscant. This thing means business. Business! Asymmetrical panels. I mean, probably. I don't imagine that I'm going to actually remember which panels I painted. Maybe I will. We'll see. We'll see. I probably won't make you sit through painting the other side panels, though. I'll do that. I'll do that before next stream, just so we can move on to some more exciting stuff. Like highlighting them all and getting everything through. Ooh, I kind of want this. I want this now. I want this. This is a thing that has to happen here. Yes. Oh, it looks so good. I think it looks good. Everyone else might disagree, but I'm really digging it. I'm thinking this is pretty cool. It's oh, I got to think about the top now too. Definitely going in here. Just come in. Definitely think. Nope. I want it to be. Do I want it now? I'm in a pickle. Do I want it to be the exterior like little flaps, or do I want it to be this big flap here? I think I want the big flap. I want the big flap. That's what I want. We're not going back. We're not going back. Yeah, we're just gonna do it. All the way. All the way. Do I go for symmetry or wherever? Like right now, I'm just kind of letting my eyeball and my emotions guide me. This is more jazz painting than it is anything else. I did not come into this with a plan outside of I was going to paint this bad boy really dark black, and I knew I wanted to use a red as kind of like a cool contrasting color. And I don't think in my head it was this much red, but I'm really liking it. So it is Sith time. We're painting a Sith LAAT. I mean, this is clearly not a good guy LAAT. There's like no way here. That is not what's happening. This thing is as evil as can be. But no, I didn't really come in with a plan here. More than that, I knew what colors I wanted to use, and I kind of had an idea in my head that I was going to do some panel lining or something, some kind of like marking with the red. And then once I started painting, I was like, oh, look at these cool panels. I bet I could paint those red. And then from there, we've wound up here where I'm just kind of identifying areas that I think will look cool in this color. Whoop. And I'm making mistakes with my brush. That's okay. I can fix that, even if I don't have my secondary brush. Let's come back in with that clean brush and push that color out. And now I'm just kind of like letting the paint take me where it wants to go. And, you know, I'm like, oh, it would be cool if these were red, wouldn't it? that looks like something that would actually happen. That seems cohesive, so let's do that. There's certainly a world in which I'd be like, well, I'm done painting red, so only one side gets the red markings and the other side is just flat black. That asymmetry has something to be said as well. You know, Gavin keeps pointing out, a couple others in the chat keep asking about asymmetrical designs. You could just have red on this side and black on this side. You know, that might be kind of interesting and cool too. Especially if the doors were open on one side. Like, if the doors were open on this side and they weren't open on the other, you know, maybe that like weird asymmetry would add to the threatening feel of the whole thing. I'm kind of a sucker for symmetry though, especially on my mechanical stuff. To me, it feels like, you know, the Empire is going to paint everything kind of symmetrical. So, I mean, for crying out loud, look at their symbol, people. It's as symmetrical as it comes. Now the Rebel Alliance, on the other hand, no symmetry. And when I did that AA5, I didn't even try to keep the stripes symmetrical, because one, I knew I was going to beat them to hell, and two, nothing about the Rebel Alliance to me says that they're going to have nice things. That's not their life. Everything they have is quite as junky as possible. It kind of just runs on hope. That's what rebellions are built on. That's how rebellions run. They run on hope. So no symmetry there. Like, I wouldn't even really look at what I had done on the other side. But this kind of clean, symmetrical approach to me feels very Empire, and really very Galactic Republic as well. You know, it's an ordered society. It's an ordered society. I mean, the Rebels overall, along with their Galactic Republic cohorts, had an amazing victory over the course of Mini-Stravaganza in the Unconventional Warfare 3-day run, which was pretty awesome to see. There were a ton of X-Wing, Armada, Legion games reported. Of course, all those rules, if you missed it, are still up on the website, atomicmassgames.com/unconventional-warfare. So if you want to play with those rules ever again, they're going to be there for ever? Question mark? I don't know. As long as we're around anyway. Those resources will be available for you to use in your games, whether with your friends or maybe once your local game store or something opens back up and you're like, hey, remember this thing? We should do that. Yeah! Do it. That's what they're there for. They're there to enhance your games and give you more options to play. It's one of the biggest drives we have in terms of studio mentality and all of that stuff. It's just creating more and more play options and opportunities, letting folks explore those collections that they spend all this time painting, building, using in different and cool ways. Unconventional Warfare is kind of the first. It won't be the last, 100%. I'm really excited with the opportunity that we have for all of the different games to bring some cool things in. Okay, I gotta stop because I only have a minute left. Next to a mini, why 100%? You can see it next to a mini. Here's a clone, a phase 2 clone, if you will. Can I get my hand out of the way so you can see it? So there you go. Boop. There's the top view. Oh, can we do the top view? There's the top view. There's another side view without all the red. It's really sad without the red, though. It needs the red. So. And yeah, I can see it. Hold on. Hold, please. I have to do this without knocking over the camera. And then we gotta find out if I can get these both. Can I get both of these bad boys in frame? Not really. So there's kind of the, well, you don't need to see the whole saber. So there you go. There it is next to the saber tooth in terms of length. So she's the LAAT is definitely it's a big boy, or girl, or person, whatever you want the ship to be. It can be whatever it wants. It has choice. You have choice. All right. Well, I still have some red to go, but overall, for an hour, we're in a really great spot. We got all our black done. We still need to do the panels, the Sinar Fleet panels or whatever they are. I need to flip the red onto this side, and then when we come back next week, Wednesday at 1 p.m. Pacific, we'll go ahead and highlight the reds. We will do some panel lining. We'll work on the canopy a lot. We'll get this puppy ready for the tabletop, ready to rock some Imperial or maybe just some, really sinister clones in a future game. So, with that, I'm going to take this camera, I'm going to put it over here. Thank you all for joining me. I hope you had a fun experience, maybe learned something or got inspired by some of the techniques that we were using. I'm excited to continue on with this LAAT and get it finished up. I think it's going to look glorious, gloriously evil, that is. If you haven't yet, you still have a couple of days left to hit us up on Instagram with hashtag MyStarWarsLegion and show us your commanders. We're looking for some really cool commander paint jobs to choose as a staff and feature on a future stream. So hashtag MyStarWarsLegion. Anybody who's a commander from Legion, you can post that up. Show us how awesome a job you did on the painting of it. We love alternate color schemes. We love all kinds of craziness, some cool basing. We're just looking for things that inspire and that bring the fun out. So you can hit those up on Instagram. Again, that we will be making our selections towards the end of next week and then showing them off sometime in April on one of the streams. So be sure to do that. Otherwise, if you're interested in airbrushing, you can check out Creative Director Dallas Kemp tomorrow. He's going to be airbrushing some terrain and talking about how he approaches that with everything going on. And then, of course, on Friday, if you want more LAAT goodness, come back, watch John Schaefer. He's going to be hitting up his LAAT. He's going to be showing a more display approach where he's going to show how to do the interiors, how to do the cockpit and the crew, how to maintain the clear plastic canopy, all the things I didn't do for my table-ready one. He's going to be taking it that extra mile. So I would definitely encourage you to check it out if you've ever had any questions. It'll apply both to the AA5 and, of course, the LAAT. They both have amazing interiors, which you can choose to hobby on and just really take up to the nines. Otherwise, folks, have a wonderful afternoon. Have a great rest of your week. I look forward to seeing you all back next week on Tuesday and Wednesday when I get to host the streams. And, of course, I'll be hanging out and chat on Thursday and Friday with both Dallas and John. Till then, be good to each other, stay beautiful, and we will see you on the next one. Goodbye.